Hi, today we're here with Beth from Little World Wanderers. She's a Charlotte Mason homeschooling mom, blessed to be raising and learning alongside the two best kids, as she calls them, that she knows. She lives in Colorado, by the mountains, and where they can find beauty and inspiration and endless opportunities to explore and play. Her journey into creating educational resources began in 2018 and she started writing units for her then preschooler. What started as a personal project quickly grew into something more thanks to the encouragement of many of her friends. Over the years, her passion for this work has deepened and her vision has expanded. And her goal is to inspire and equip families to embrace a living and life giving education that nourishes both the mind and the soul. One that cultivates curiosity, wonder, and joy for both parents and children alike. So, with that, hello, Beth. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Okay, I just want to say thank you for coming on, and we're going to talk for a bit about you and about what you do, and I'd like to start that by asking what can you share about the story behind the creation of Little World Wanderers?
Yeah. So my daughter and my son have almost a 6 year age gap. They're 5 years, 8 months apart. So when my daughter was little, we started homeschooling her. She was around 2, and we decided that we were going to homeschool preschool. Mostly because preschool is expensive and we were a single income family. So I figured I could probably do it myself. I have a background in education. I'm a former teacher. So I started homeschooling her. And then about the time she turned 3 or 4, we were pulling different books from the library and I was creating these activities to go along with these books. So we would read a book and I would notice in the pages, like, oh, they cooked this particular recipe. Like, we're going to make that recipe this week and we're going to do an art project based on this book. And I ended up cultivating this preschool experience for her. Around the same time, I also found Charlotte Mason through a book my friend gave me for the children's sake. And we started implementing aspects of a Charlotte Mason home in our preschool and then kindergarten year when my son came home. Um, but I was writing these units and I specifically tailored them to learning about the world. I grew up military, so
Oh,
I was blessed to be able to travel. I was born overseas, I've lived overseas, and I have a huge heart for taking my children. Like, I would love to take my children to travel. We're planning our first trip this year, which is
fun.
very exciting. Um, but my daughter also has a huge love of just learning about people. She cares about others. She loves to know people's stories. Since she was little, she has always wanted to know about others and get to know them. So we specifically spent years cultivating a rich multicultural education for her. And we would intentionally check out books on various cultures and countries. And I started writing down all of the activities I was doing. And friends were asking for them. And they finally said, like, hey, you should maybe publish this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, for sure. You absolutely seem to have come to that in a quiet way, kind of a thing. It wasn't like, oh, I'm
yeah.
going to make a curriculum. It just came to you as you were doing it, which is really great because then it's all experience too, right? As you go on. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
what? Oh, yeah.
I spent years developing these unit studies and then I released them on January 1st, 2020. Um,
Mm.
and a couple months later, everybody was homeschooling and Little World Wanderers started to take off a little bit more.
Wow, that's amazing. So just what inspired you to adopt the Charlotte Mason philosophy besides the fact that your friend gave you that for children's sake book from Charlotte Mason? Like what in it that made you want to make that a part of your homeschool?
Yeah. So coming from a background in education, I kind of had this idea of what I thought school should look like. And ultimately, we felt like we were preparing our daughter to go to kindergarten. So I got her very kindergarten ready. Like, she could have walked into the classroom and been perfectly fine. And about the time it came to enroll her in kindergarten, we felt like this was not the right decision for us. Um, so I read For the Children's Sake, and this the way that Charlotte Mason laid out education is atmosphere, discipline, and a life, that it isn't, we're not going for the, you know, what do we know and quizzing based off what we know. It's how much does the child care about what they know. And I looked back a lot on my own childhood. And while I went to public school and private school, and I went to military schools overseas, I was fortunate enough to be raised in a family where education, the continuing of education was a big deal. So we did hikes in, the English countryside, and my parents took us to castles and museums, and we learned different artists. And we joked with my dad that he has never met a sign that he didn't read. So we would go to the zoo and there would be a sign about a giraffe. And it's like, Dad, you've seen a giraffe. Like, a giraffe, but he's still going to read the sign. And our parents would take us to so many places. And then my dad would say, You're going to care that you were here one day.
Mm.
And I started reflecting on that when my daughter was young. I was like, Oh, I care now. Like,
Yeah.
maybe I didn't then, but I care now. And
Mhm.
I wanted to give my children an education that they cared about. Um, and that kind of
Yeah.
led, and then I read all of the other volumes and kind of just knew that this is what we wanted to do.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like her whole program is amazing. Like, and everybody thinks, oh, she focuses more on reading, which she does, but it's way deeper than that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, um, how did your personal education background influence you? Did it ever hinder you in a way, or do you think it you or maybe both?
I think both. So there are definitely hindrances to having a background in education. I feel like I had to unlearn a lot of what I thought school should look like, especially in the elementary years. So I taught fifth grade and then I taught third grade. And my focus was on math and science. So I have this kind of idea, or I came with this idea of like, what does a proof of learning actually look like? And in the school system, it does look like worksheets and tests and, collaboration projects and group projects and things like that. And in a Charlotte Mason home, proof of learning is going to look a lot like narration. That is your proof of learning, is narration in the younger years. The ways that it's helped me though is I do feel very confident in my ability to teach my child. I look at the time I spend investing and learning about Charlotte Mason as my own professional development. So I'm very willing to continue to learn and expand upon that. But I can also see that when there have been, you know, not necessarily red flags, but areas of deficit in her education, I have been able to address them rather quickly and then move forward.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really good as that's because then like all homeschool moms can learn that. And I don't want to come across as saying you need a teacher's education, but you definitely um would maybe be able to see those red flags quite quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And,
yeah,
children learn and grow at their own pace. And
yeah.
my son is kindergarten right now. So the way that he is learning how to read looks very different than the way my daughter is learning how to read. But I'm sure that there are going to be things that come up with him that I never, had to deal with her. And I'm sure that there are things that I've had to manage with her that with him are going to be a non issue.
Oh, absolutely. Like every child is an individual. We actually had 7 children and we homeschooled all of them. And
Oh,
th- and they're all different and they all learn differently and they all
yeah.
were unique in their own way. And when I was homeschooling, I was kind of like yeah, it was kind of like in the dark because it wasn't something that was very familiar when I started. So, yeah, it's just really interesting and cool for me to see how things have progressed through the years.
Mhm.
And there's so much to offer to all homeschool moms. Yeah. So, yeah. So, for all those who are unfamiliar, can you explain the core principles of Charlotte Mason?
Yeah. Charlotte Mason is broken down into 20 principles, and that everything that she writes and discusses and lectured and talks about, it's evident through all of her programs that she wrote for the PNEU. come down to these core 20 principles. And the first one is going to be that children are born persons, that they are unique individuals. They are not these vessels to be filled with. They are coming into the world as their own person. And our ultimate job is to, you know, honor and respect that personhood. And then she has said too about mothers, I think it's in Parents and Children, that our first responsibility to our children is to point them to God. That is our chief concern. So when you couple that with their personhood, like this is what you're working towards is respecting this, child of God who
Mhm.
has been entrusted into your care. And then she has other aspects of her philosophy and her principles that are broken down. Narration is so important to the Charlotte Mason method that it actually takes up two or three of her principles. Um,
Yeah.
and narration is just the art of telling back what you've heard or read, which sounds so simple, and it can be very simple, but it also can feel very difficult at times. Um,
Mm. Yeah,
so,
and I think you have to it's genius in the sense that you have to know the concept behind it to actually narrate.
yeah, when you look at, you know, my demographic or my age who's grown up in the public school systems are, um, oh goodness, I remember taking my first standardized test in school in fourth grade. And I mean, this was the first time. And we now test as low as when I was teaching, we were testing as low as third grade, and it was comprehension testing. So it's read this passage, answer these questions, read this passage, answer these questions. And
Mhm.
when I was in school, our teacher brushed off the test of like, we're going to show up for the next 2 days and take this, do your best. But like, it's not that big of a deal. When I was teaching, the test it was a monumental deal. Um, and getting away from that part of you need to like prove your learning by answering questions. Narration does that. You're not specifically testing comprehension. You're not going to ask like in Paul Bunyan, what color was Babe? Like
Yeah.
maybe that's not the living idea that your child walks away from, but you can ask, tell me the story of how Paul Bunyan found Babe.
Okay.
And maybe they'll catch up or they'll tell you, like, oh, and Babe was blue because he was under the snow and Paul dug him out. And like, but if you just asked, what color was Babe, you lose the living idea or you lose the whole story, or you're not really catching what your child is learning and caring about in that.
Okay. Mhm. For sure. And like as such, narration is also, I think personally, that narration is a precursor to like writing also.
Oh, for
So,
sure.
right? Like it's like when you have said something, it's clear in your mind and then you can write it down. Or you could even write it down for them to begin with, but at least they've narrated it to you and they have a sense of accomplishment there already in that
Yeah, yeah.
narration. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
started dictated narrations in first grade. So once a week, my child would dictate a narration to me and I would write it down and then she would draw a picture. So I have this notebook of hers when she was like teeny tiny, filled with all of these adorable drawings. And now
Yeah.
she's a fifth grader, so she is required to do a written narration a day. Um, and that will eventually work its way into composition. But then there are elements to support the written narration, copy work, dictation, all of those things are going to help her, understand the grammar and syntax and spelling in order to have a good written narration.
Mhm. Yeah. So what grade is she in now then?
So she's in fifth grade.
Oh, fifth grade. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
So I think too that habit of beginning in grade one, and then it can just be built on.
Mhm.
Those pathways can be built in the brain where it can be built on, and that's I think the beauty of that whole narration story.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
it's so funny with her because when she was in first grade, I was like, we are gonna start narration. And it was hard for her at first. She has grown into I mean, she can beautifully narrate most things. Of course, we have a book or two every once in a while where it's just like, she'll come up to me, she goes, I don't know. Like,
yeah,
that happens to me too.
yeah, for
Let's,
sure.
let's
Yeah,
extend some grace. But
yeah,
my son, who's in he's kindergarten, he's not even compulsory schooling. He will come up to me. He's like, let me tell you my narration. Or he will listen in on a book that I'm reading to. So last year, he was 4 last year, and we're reading Oliver Twist, and he would look at my daughter and goes, "And you forgot the part where Fagin," like, "You're good. I don't even have to you how to narrate. This is just like been in
Natural.
with your life."
Um, More than likely, he's also watched his sister do it a lot, so that
I
probably
know.
helps the situation too. Yeah. Um, yeah. So, how do you integrate living books into your curriculum?
Oh, I don't even think it's an integration. It is the core of what we do. I do think that there is some subjectivity to living books. What is living for one person may not be living for another. And I talk about this with friends a lot because I have had books where I'm like, I understand the merit of this book, the value of this book. It is well written, but like I I'm gonna finish it,
Uh-huh.
but it's just not the book for me, and it doesn't mean that it isn't good. So, with Oliver Twist, my daughter really struggled with Oliver Twist last year, and it is I believe that Oliver Twist is a living book and offers living ideas,
Yeah.
but it's hard, and at one point, she came up to me and she goes, "I just want something good to happen." Like, I get it. She goes, "This is not a good book." And we talked about that. And I go, "Well, why isn't it a good book?" And she's like, "Because Oliver is just," and she went into all of these things that has happened to Oliver. And I was like, "But you feel something for him. Like
Yeah.
Dickens made you feel like you
Mhm.
feel empathy for this little boy who existed a couple hundred years ago. He's fictional. I'm like, your heart is breaking for him." And so we talked about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, living books are like our homeschool just wouldn't exist if we didn't do living books.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so I'm going to pivot a bit. What is the role? Because you said you live in the beautiful mountains of Colorado. Um, I'm from Ontario,
Oh, okay.
Canada. So yeah, I'm not even in the U.S., but I do love mountain. But so, what does the role of nature study play in your homeschooling routine?
Oh goodness. So we try to do nature journaling every week. We attend when it is not, it was -6 last week. Nobody went outside. We
Yeah.
attempt to get out for nature walks. We actually have a duck pond really close by to us. So we've been walking to the duck pond, once a week or so for years. We've been in our house for 6 years. So
Oh,
I can't even, I could, if I had like a pencil and paper, I could multiply that out and tell you how many times we've likely visited the duck pond. Um, but a big part of nature study for us is my children they notice nature, they are fine-tuned to just see it. We put up some new bird feeders right now, and in a single morning, we might notice 8 different species of
yeah.
bird. My son can name and my daughter can name. But my husband and my daughter went skiing last weekend, and they came across a porcupine who was
Really?
yeah, he had climbed a tree and he was eating the pine needles and like had snow all over his face. And they took a video, but they saw this porcupine and they kind of like noticed it, and then they looped back and did the same run again and like stopped and took pictures and videos. And then my daughter came home and she told me all about this porcupine. And then she wrote it in her nature journal and drew a picture in her nature journal and like we've read the Burgess Animal book. So she knew about porcupines and all of these
Yeah.
things. It's just nature study for us can be very intentional, like with the bird feeders, and we're paying attention to the birds and we're noting them and making a bird list, or it's organic and we're out on a hike and we see an elk and we,
Yeah.
look at elk tracks or
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually kind of cool. I wonder what I didn't know actually realize that the porcupine would be around in the snow. So that's what
yeah.
kind of interesting. Yeah.
I've
Oh,
never
yeah.
seen one before. I knew that they lived here, but like I've never seen them before. And
Oh, okay.
right.
Yeah. So one time when we were like quite a few years ago when our kids were still small, we had one of we had two dogs and a they got into a porcupine and we came home and they had porcupines all over their nose.
Oh,
It's something, yeah. So I guess we have them quite a bit here, like in Ontario, yeah. So so how do you approach habit training with your children? Like, everyone likes to hear about how you habit train within your family, and how do you do that from the Charlotte Mason
Ugh.
perspective?
I just read about habit training this morning, and I will be entirely honest and say all of our habits went out the window in December. So between my daughter is in ballet, so she danced in the Nutcracker. And then we had 2 grandparent visits and Christmas, and then we all got the flu. So it's like there is not a scrap of habit to be found in our home. And it's honestly a little painful getting back into it. For my own sake, because, it requires so much attention on the mother's part. So Charlotte Mason, in what I just read, and I can narrate to you, she said that there are habits that we do have to pay very close attention to. And when we notice a child has a habit, like a poor habit that needs to be addressed, that child should be under the constant care and supervision of their mother. And she says even up to a month. And her case for this is if the child were ill, the mother would take that time to nurture them. So we look at some habits like the one that she references cruelty. And like if the child is being cruel to animals or a younger sibling, like we would look at that as a moral deficit that we don't want them to grow up to be a cruel person. So we do need to address it. And they are to bask under the constant glow of their mother. And I can say that, like, when we are training a habit, I don't feel like constantly glowing in order for them to
Wow.
bask in it. Um, for this age, it is a lot of like repetition. Here, you get your shoes. Where do your I'd say where do your shoes live? 5 to 35 times a day. Whenever they walk through the door, where do your shoes live? And they
Yeah.
know, go put your shoes away. And that is addressing like we are doing the habit of cleanliness. And when we're doing the habit of attention, and this is one that like my children do very well with the habit of attention during school, but that also extends to like the home. Like you have looked at and noticed that you have left your socks here and they need to be put away. Like you can notice that, you know, perhaps the dishes could be tidied or something. So at this age with a 5-year-old in particular, I tried very hard not to pay attention to all of the things, like, we need to fix all of the things. It's what is the one habit that we are working on right now? Like, we are working on putting your shoes away, and that's the habit I'm focused on, and, or we are if we're focusing on, I don't even know how I could classify it, but, like, let's say he stomps his foot at me, I ask him to
Yeah.
do something,
Caught
like
character. Yeah.
yeah, like
Respect.
that, like, respect.
Yeah.
That is the habit I'm focusing on. So I'm not gonna like nitpick this one and 15 other different things. We're just gonna lay
Yeah.
down the rail at this. So when I say, please go put this away, I get an okay, mom, or like, yes, mom, instead of stomp your foot and groan at me.
Yeah, exactly.
That
Yeah.
one is
And I think
extending.
that's, yeah, no, but that's the point, I think, too, right? Like, we do want them to learn those things, but we also want them to do it respectfully. And
Mhm.
that's difficult. And I have a friend who had a son who it was something she did. It was just kind of a cute story. She had him, he had to hang up his towel after his shower she had 8 children. She had to hang up his towel every time he did. And she said the night before he got married, he did not hang up his towel. So
Like,
so, like,
that's
she said, "Okay, I'm done."
and
She did it herself.
and
So,
she
yeah,
oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
So I think, in that sense, like, um, even in those situations, grace is so important too, like,
Yes.
and teaching the character is maybe it's not it's more important, and it hopefully will come to that, but not always does it, right? Like, sometimes I
Yes.
find with my own kids too, once they got married, their houses were perfect, but the room was never perfect here. So, you did teach them, but it took longer for it to
Yeah. And Charlotte Mason would say too, like you want to give them a single living life on which to, address and connect with, and that will help instill the habit. And that's not to say that we're going to moralize this habit, but when my daughter was little, we read a book called Daisy Come Here, and it's about a duck, and the mama duck tells Daisy, the baby duck, like, don't swim out into the pond. You need to stay in the little bushes, or the shark will get you.
Mhm.
And Daisy, like, paddles out further and comes back, and the mom continues to tell her, like, "Don't stay, like, don't go into the pond, the hawk will get you. Well, Daisy goes into the pond and a hawk swoops down and almost catches Daisy and she brushes back to her mama. And my daughter was probably 4 and she's like, "Oh, I guess that's why you stay close to your mom."
She learned to something. She learned from that. Yes.
So
Yeah.
even I mean, you could read fairy tales and fairy tales without moralizing them, without, like, drilling at home to your children of saying, like, "And that is why you should always pick up your shoes." Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
you can just
There's different
offer,
ways.
yeah, some living ideas that may or may not connect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So we have maybe 5 to 10 more minutes, and I'd like you to talk to us about your programs and your studies, and maybe your a mother's education program, its objectives. What can participants expect, and how does it differ from other curriculums that you know? Like, tell us about it.
Yeah, so a mother's education is based off of the Charlotte Mason Mother's Education Program. So she actually held very high expectations of mothers. And you can see that through the volumes. One of the quotes that is often said is, if the mother could do for herself what she does for her children, she would have a happier household. And it says, let the mother go out to play. And it's interesting to me that in the immediate sentences following, she says, like, a mother should go out into the field for half a day with a book or an art museum for a day or things like these, the joy of a living education for a mom. So Charlotte Mason did have a mother's education program with the PNEU, and she would have mothers write in their narrations. And she put together a book list. So about 3 years ago, I released a mother's education and I basically took all of the subjects of what the expectations for a Charlotte Mason educated child and bumped up that rigor for an adult. So the first volume addresses poetry and classical literature and fiction, uh, science, history, um, mythology, fairy tales, like all of these different areas. And my hope for it was that moms who either wanted to grow their own education outside of what they were doing with their children, or moms who were interested in the Charlotte Mason, but like wanted to try it themselves to see what does this actually do, I would be able to do that. So I've deviated over the last 2 years and I've started adding seasonal programs. And every season is a brand new book list. None of the books have been repeated across any of the programs. And we read 6 books. So the spring season will start in our first Zoom call will be in April. And we will be reading through 6 books together. And it covers nature study, poetry, history, science. Um, there's a biography this term or the next term. And then every other week we meet on Zoom and we discuss one of the books. We share our own narrations, we share our commonplace journals, we talk about the handicrafts we've been working on, and just really take this Charlotte Mason education and bring it down, like bring it into our own lives very intentionally.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. So where could a mother get a hold um of all that, um like even the Zoom calls and the unit studies and the books, and
Yeah.
where could we send a mom to find that?
So on my website, littleworldwanderers.com, I have a section called units, and then there is another section in there called a mother's education. So the only program that will have Zoom calls is the one we are currently doing. So we are currently doing winter, and then I have two specifically liturgical studies, one for Advent and one for Lent that I lead every year.
Mm, mm.
And so the Lenten study actually releases February 14th, and we will we will be reading through 6 books, but they are very specifically tailored through walking the 40 days prior to Lent.
Okay.
Um, and so that will have Zoom calls, and then our current winter study has the Zoom calls. So whatever season it's in. And then once you purchase the program, you have access to the full book list. And then I send out emails to, if you aren't able to make it to the call, I send out the Zoom recordings.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Yeah. So what would you can you share us? Can you share a success story from yourself, your family, or from another family from using your resources?
Yeah. So I have heard multiple times from mothers that using a mother's education to them has breathed so much renewed life into how they homeschool. Not just because they're, they're doing these beautiful, wonderful things for their children. And you don't have to, specifically purchase a unit. You could add a book of poetry for your own sake. But just taking that time when you have young children and nurturing this aspect of your own living education, I've heard time and time again from moms that this has been just such a life giving thing. Um, and then the other units I write for kindergarten and preschool and math and all of that, I hear over and over from families how much they love and enjoy it. It really I try to write things. I write first for my own children. So the kindergarten program and the preschool programs that I have, I wrote for my son. The math history program I just released, like I wrote that for my daughter. And it just so happens that other families want to do it too.
Yeah.
Um, Thankfully, they love it as much as my own kids.
Yes. Well, and yes. Yes. Okay. So, what would be one thing that you would tell homeschool moms everywhere? What advice, encouragement, um, or success you would can offer to homeschool moms everywhere?
I
A
think,
word from you. Just a word from you.
yeah, I think it's very easy to second guess and overthink it. And I always tell moms, especially newer moms considering homeschool, to approach it very prayerfully and make sure that you're not coming from a place of fear. Homeschooling
Mm,
from a place of fear can be detrimental
yeah.
to your homeschool. So make sure that you have explored the options. Charlotte Mason, I believe, is a wonderful, beautiful philosophy, and we are so grateful to implement it in our home. But your child, if you're considering homeschool, might not. You may not agree with this message philosophy, and that's okay. You can find other aspects. But just be very prayerful in the way you approach homeschool.
I love that. I love that. It's a beautiful note to end on. So, yeah, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. And I think that this is what I would like to convey. I just want to wholeheartedly advocate that they should go in, check you out because it sounds like you've got a lot to offer.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much for coming today.